The air in the grand ballroom of the Port Kala Continental was thick with the scent of money and perfume. Cameras flashed, reflecting off diamond earrings and the polished domes of bald heads. This was Chief Baraka Ikezi's night, the launch of his foundation, a monument to his new, cleaner self. He stood on a low stage, bathed in a soft golden light, his arms outstretched in a gesture of paternal welcome. His expensive white agbada made him look almost holy. The crowd, a mix of old money and new tech, hung on his every word. "We are not just building a company." Baraka's voice, smooth as aged palm wine, flowed from the speakers. "We are forging a future, a destiny for the youth of Port Kala, for the innovators, for the dreamers." Applause rippled through the room. The tycoon beamed, his practiced smile firmly in place. His gaze swept across the adoring faces, a king surveying his court. Then his eyes snagged on something small, something impossible. And the world stopped. Across the room, near a pillar, stood a girl, young, dressed in the plain black shirt of the event staff. She wasn't looking at him. She was focused on her boss, a harried photographer wrestling with a stubborn flash. Around her neck, catching the light, was a necklace, a silver weaver bird, its wings intricately threaded with gold. Its eye, a single perfect emerald, seemed to stare directly at him from across the decades. Baraka's breath caught in his throat. The smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The microphone in his hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. He swayed, a tremor running through his large frame. The room, the adulation, the faces, it all dissolved into a roar in his ears. There was only the necklace, the one he had commissioned himself, the one he had placed around the neck of Dr. Eshe right before he had signed the papers that would ruin her life. His sister Funmalayo materialized at his elbow. She was a vision of severe elegance in a black power suit, her face a carefully neutral mask. But her eyes, sharp and cold as shards of glass, missed nothing. She saw the direction of his stare. She saw the jewelry. Her expression didn't change, but a muscle in her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Baraka!" Her voice was a low hiss, for his ears only. "Breathe. They are looking at you." He couldn't tear his eyes away. "It's hers, Fumi. It's Eshe's." "That is impossible," she stated, her voice flat. "That bauble is long gone. Dust, like its owner." "Look," he whispered, his voice cracking. The girl adjusted her collar and the emerald eye winked at him again, a tiny green star of judgment. Fumi's gaze followed his. She saw the assistant. She saw the pendant. For a fraction of a second, her professional calm wavered. She recognized the unique design from old photographs, from Baraka's maudlin descriptions in the early days. "Compose yourself. Now," she commanded, her rings digging into the soft flesh of his arm. The pain was a sharp, grounding reality. He flinched, turning back to the crowd. He fumbled with his glasses, pulling out a silk cloth to clean the perfectly clear lenses. "Thank you," he mumbled into the microphone, his voice thin. "Thank you all." The billionaire turned and walked off the stage, his regal grace gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a much older, frailer man. Fumi remained for a moment, her eyes locked on the young woman. She was an anomaly, a ghost at the feast, a loose data point in a perfectly curated system. The COO subtly caught the eye of a thick-necked man in a tight suit standing by the exit. Her head gave a barely perceptible nod towards the photographer's assistant. The man's expression did not change. He simply blinked once, an acknowledgement of his new directive. Backstage, in a small private lounge, Baraka was pacing. "How, Fumi? How is that thing here?" "It doesn't matter how," his sister replied, closing the door behind her. She was already tapping on her phone. "It only matters that it is dealt with." "That girl, who is she? Does she know?" "She knows nothing," Funmalayo said with absolute certainty. "She is a nobody, a street girl who stumbled upon something she shouldn't have, an inconvenience." Baraka stopped pacing and slumped into a leather chair. He put his head in his hands. I saw Eshe. For a second I thought it was her." "Sentiment is a flaw in the system, Baraka," Fumi said, not unkindly but with the detached air of a surgeon diagnosing a disease. "You are the face of this company. Do not let it crack." She looked down at the tablet in her hand. A profile was already building. Adana Okoro, age 20, address in Makoko Shore. Meanwhile, out in the ballroom, Adana was packing up lens filters. "Did you see Chief Ikezi's face?" her boss whispered, sweating. "He looked like he'd seen a ghost." I wasn't looking, she said, her focus on her task. The assistant just wanted the night to be over. Her feet hurt. Suddenly, a waiter carrying a tray laden with champagne flutes stumbled right beside her. "Oh, careful!" her employer yelled. It was too late. The tray tilted and a wave of sticky, expensive liquid drenched Adana's shirt and backpack. "Oh, my apologies." "I am so sorry," the server gushed, his face a mask of concern. He and another staff member began dabbing at her with napkins, fussing over her, creating a small bubble of chaos. It's fine, she said, annoyed and embarrassed. The young woman shrugged off their help, trying to check if her cheap phone in her backpack pocket was damaged. The crowd was already moving on, their attention drawn to the main dessert buffet. In the confusion, her phone, slick with champagne, was expertly palmed by the clumsy waiter. He passed it to the thick-necked security man who disappeared into the service corridors. 10 minutes later, Fumi's tablet pinged. She swiped it open. Full data sync complete. Photos, contacts, call history, GPS locations, everything. The COO looked at the most recent photo on Adana's phone, a selfie with her mother at their small fabric stall, both of them laughing. A liability. And liabilities had to be managed. Fumi stood, her posture perfect. She performed one last task before leaving the gala. She opened a separate encrypted banking app and approved a large wire transfer. The beneficiary was a rural school in a distant province. The memo line read simply, "Annual Scholarship Fund." She closed the app and turned to her brother, who was still staring into space. Her voice was calm, controlled, and utterly final. "The variable is contained," she said. "I will handle the anomaly." The next morning, Adana's life began to fray at the edges. It started with a phone call from her boss, Mr. Adebayo. His voice was strained, apologetic. "Adana, I'm so sorry. I have to let you go." Adana, who was trying to scrub the sticky champagne stain out of her work shirt, froze. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong?" "There was a complaint from the Ikezi Foundation." "A complaint? About what?" Her mind raced. The spilled drinks. Had they blamed her? It was very serious, Adana, and vague. They said you were unprofessional, disruptive. They were very insistent. He sounded genuinely distressed. "My contract with them is worth half my year's income. My hands are tied." The line went dead. She stared at her phone, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Unprofessional? She was always careful, always invisible. It made no sense. 2 days later, the chaos arrived at her doorstep. Her mother came home from the market early, her face pale, her hands trembling. "It's gone, Adana. Everything." "What's gone, Mama?" "The stall. They tore it down. City auditors. They said we didn't have the right permits, that our license was fraudulent." She held up a crumpled piece of paper. "We've had that license for 10 years. It's never been a problem." They rushed to the Makoko Shore Market, where their vibrant stall once stood, overflowing with colorful ankara and lace fabrics. There was now just splintered wood and trampled earth. The bolts of cloth were gone, confiscated. A few neighboring vendors looked on, their faces a mixture of pity and fear, unwilling to meet their eyes. This wasn't a routine inspection. This was an erasure. The final blow came that Friday. A formal eviction notice was pasted to their door. 3 months of unpaid back rent, it claimed. An obvious lie. Her mother paid the rent in cash every single month, a fact the landlord had always been happy with. Now he refused to even answer their calls. They were being dismantled piece by piece. Adana felt a rising tide of panic mixed with a hot, simmering rage. This wasn't random bad luck. This was targeted. The gala, the complaint, the stall, the eviction. It was all connected. But why? With nowhere else to turn, she took the one thing of value she owned. The silver weaver bird necklace her grandmother had given her. It felt heavy in her hand, heavier than it ever had before. The young woman went to a small, dusty jeweler's shop in the old part of the city. The old man behind the counter peered at the necklace through his loupe, his breath fogging the glass. He turned it over and over in his wrinkled hands. "This is a fine piece," he said, his voice raspy. "Very fine. A custom commission. The emerald alone is flawless." "How much is it worth?" Adana asked, her voice tight. The jeweler put down his loupe and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw her worn jeans, her anxious face. "Where did a girl like you get a necklace like this?" "It was my grandmother's," she said, the truth feeling thin even to her own ears. I cannot buy this, the man said, pushing it gently back across the counter. Why not? You just said it was valuable. It is priceless, he corrected her, which means it is also worthless to a man like me. No one I know would touch it. This piece was made for someone extremely powerful. To be found with it would be unwise. It is the kind of object that carries a story, and I do not wish to be part of it. Adana left the shop, her heart pounding. Powerful people. A story. The words echoed the cold feeling that had been building inside her. The necklace was the key. That evening, she was sitting at a street-side stall, picking at a plate of fried plantains she could barely afford. Her mother was staying with an aunt across the city, but Adana had refused to go. She felt a defiant need to stay, to face whatever was coming. A man sat down at her table. He was well-dressed in a crisp white shirt, and the air around him smelled of expensive, spicy cologne. He didn't speak, just unwrapped a small bag of chin-chin and began to eat it, the noisy crunching sound grating on Adana's raw nerves. She ignored him, staring down at her plate. "The dodo is good here," he said conversationally. "My condolences about your mother's stall. A real shame about those old market stalls. So flammable, the Ankara fabrics." Adana's head snapped up. Her blood ran cold. He smiled, a polite, empty gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "My employer is a sympathetic man," the stranger continued, pushing a thick white envelope across the grimy plastic table. "He heard of your troubles. A gift to help you get back on your feet." She stared at the envelope. It was bulging with cash, enough to solve everything. The rent, a new stall, a new life. Safety. "What does he want?" she whispered. "A trifle," the man replied, popping another piece of chin-chin into his mouth. "An old trinket your grandmother left you. A sentimental piece, I'm sure, but my employer is a collector of such things." He gestured to the necklace she was wearing. So this was it. The end game. All of this for a piece of jewelry. Adana looked at the money, then at the man's smug, confident face. She saw the eviction notice in her mind, her mother's stricken expression, the wreckage of their stall. She felt the weight of their desperation, the sheer relief that envelope could provide. Her hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing the smooth paper. It was real. It was a way out. But then she looked up and saw the man's smile widen. It was the smile of a predator who knew its prey was cornered. He thought he had won. He thought she was just another poor girl who could be bought and broken. A sudden white-hot fury burned through her fear. It was pure defiant rage. Her expression changed. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a hard, glittering light. In a single explosive motion, she snatched the envelope, not to accept it, but to possess it. She tore it open and a cascade of high-denomination Naira notes spilled out. Before the man could react, she flung the entire wad of cash directly into his shocked face. "Tell your employer," she spat, her voice shaking with adrenaline, "to keep his blood money." She didn't wait for his response. She spun around and ran, shoving her way through the crowded street, disappearing into the chaotic, sprawling darkness of the Port Kala night. The man was left sitting at the table, cash scattered around him on the dirty ground, his smug expression replaced by one of cold, murderous surprise. Adana didn't stop running. She plunged deeper into the labyrinth of Makoko shore, her breath tearing at her lungs. The man's surprised face burned into her mind. She ended up at the cramped, stuffy apartment of a distant cousin who took her in with more questions than comfort. She spent the night on a thin mat on the floor, the silver necklace cold against her skin, her mind racing. This was no longer about bad luck. It was a hunt, and she was the prey. The next day, fueled by a desperate, gnawing curiosity, she turned to the only link she had to the necklace's past, her grandmother's things. Her mother had kept a single battered trunk of her grandmother's possessions. Adana pried open the rusted latches, a faint scent of camphor and old paper filling the small room. Inside were worn clothes, a faded photo album, and at the very bottom a small leather-bound journal. It was warped and stained, its pages stuck together from years of humidity. She carried it to the single window, using her fingernail to gently separate the stiff pages. The handwriting was a looping, elegant cursive, but many entries were smudged and illegible. Most of it was mundane, notes on housekeeping, lists of groceries, prayers. But then she found what she was looking for, a name, repeated over and over. Dr. Eshe. Her grandmother had written about this woman with a mixture of awe and pity. "Dr. Eshe is not eating again," one entry read. She just sits by the window. She says they stole her work, but it is her soul they really took. Adana's fingers traced the faded ink. So the jeweler was right. The necklace belonged to someone. A broken genius, as her grandmother had called her. She kept turning the pages, her frustration mounting. Most of the text was a blur. She almost gave up, tossing the journal onto the mat. It fell open to a page near the end. The ink here was darker, more hurried, as if written in a single frantic burst. Several words were obscured by a large dark water stain. Adana knelt, squinting at the page. She could only make out fragments. "The final gift," the entry read. "Havra, my last insurance. A digital failsafe. My soul is inside the weaver. They will never find it unless they look in the light." She read it again, and again. It sounded like the ramblings of a person who had lost their mind. A digital failsafe. The soul of the weaver? It was poetry, not a clue. Disappointed, she snapped the journal shut. Later that night, unable to sleep, she sat in the dark, the necklace in her hand. The power was out again, a common occurrence. The only light came from the cheap battery-powered UV pen light she used to check for fake banknotes, a trick she'd learned in the market. She clicked it on, casting a weak purple glow around the room. She idly ran the light over her hand, then over the necklace dangling from her fingers. She was about to click it off when something caught her eye. She froze. Under the normal light of day, the golden threads that formed the weaver bird's nest were just a beautiful, chaotic pattern. But under the specific narrow frequency of the UV light, they transformed. Faint, almost invisible lines within the gold began to glow with a faint blue luminescence. It wasn't chaos. It was a pattern. A complex digital maze of squares and lines. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She remembered the distorted image on a product she'd scanned for a photographer once. A QR code. Her hands shook as she grabbed her battered smartphone. The camera was cracked, but it worked. She held the UV light steady with one hand, aiming the phone's camera at the glowing pattern with the other. It wouldn't focus. The light was too weak, the code too intricate, her hands too unsteady. Come on," she whispered, her voice a strained hiss. She tried again, bracing her arm against her knee. Nothing. The phone's camera couldn't lock on. She recalled the old jeweler's words, a custom commission, and the journal entry, "In the light." It wasn't just any light. She tried again, twisting the necklace, changing the angle. For a split second, a small green bracket appeared on her phone screen, attempting to frame the code. Then it vanished. It was there. It was real. She spent what felt like hours in the dark, her back aching, her eyes straining. The batteries in her pen light began to fade, the purple glow turning weak and flickering. She was about to give up, convinced she had imagined it all when she tried one last desperate angle. The green brackets reappeared on her screen. They flickered, then held. The phone vibrated. A web address appeared on the screen. It was a long, nonsensical string of letters and numbers. Below it, a single box waited. Password. Adana stared, her mind blank. A password? What password? She typed in Eshi, access denied. She tried grandmother, access denied. Hope began to curdle back into despair. She had the key to a door she could not open. She picked up the journal again, her mind racing. What had it said? "My soul is inside the weaver." The weaver. That was the bird. But what else? Her eyes scanned the legible parts of the frantic last entry. There was another word she had overlooked, right at the start. Project. The water stain obscured the next word, but she could see the top of the letters. It looked like Project Weaver. Her fingers flew across the phone's keypad. She typed in the single word, Weaver. She pressed enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen refreshed. It was no longer a password prompt. It was a file directory. The top of the page had a simple, stark title, Project Weaver, the Ikezi Betrayal. Below it were folders, dozens of them. Original source code, time-stamped. Partnership agreements, E and I. Internal communications, Fumi. Adana's breath hitched. Fumi, the name of the severe woman in the black suit from the gala, Chief Ikezi's sister. She clicked on the last folder. It opened to a long list of email files. Her eyes scanned the subject lines. Re the Eshi problem. Finalizing the frame-up. Contingency, the board. She was holding a ghost confession. A complete digital record of a corporate assassination. This was not just a story. It was a weapon. But it was a weapon she had no idea how to use. Leaking it online would be a drop in the ocean, easily dismissed as a fake. She needed more. She needed a platform. She needed someone who would know what to do with a bomb like this. Her mind went back to the journal, to a name her grandmother had mentioned only once, a journalist, Dr. Eshe had trusted before her fall, a man she said still had a fire in him, Mbeki. Adana shut the phone off, the screen going dark. She now had the key and the name of the man who might just have the door, and for the first time since the gala, the fear inside her was finally eclipsed by something else, a cold, hard sense of purpose. Finding Mbeki was harder than Adana expected. He wasn't at any of the major newspapers. His name yielded only old articles and a single outdated address for a small news agency that had folded 5 years ago. After 2 days of asking around the old press haunts, she was directed to a grimy, smoke-stained bar near the port, a place where forgotten journalists went to drink. The bartender pointed to a man slouched in a dark corner booth. "That's Kalo. Don't expect him to be happy to see you." The office she was eventually led to was less an office and more a storage room for old resentments. Stacks of yellowing newspapers slumped against the walls. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes. Mbeki, a man who looked like he had been sleeping in his clothes for a week, slumped into a squeaking chair behind a cluttered desk. He gestured for her to sit, then took out an unlit cigarette, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger. He watched her, his eyes bored and heavy-lidded. "All right," he sighed, his voice raspy. "What is it? Landlord trouble? Police harassment? I write press releases now, not crusades." Adana's carefully prepared speech died in her throat. This was not the man with fire in his belly her grandmother's journal described. This was a man whose fire had long since burned out. "I have a story," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "about Chief Baraka Ikezi." Kalo let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, a story about Saint Baraka. Let me guess. He didn't donate enough to your cousin's wedding? His motorcade cut you off in traffic?" He leaned forward slightly. "Go to his foundation. They hand out money for sob stories." "I don't." Adana's jaw tightened. She reached into her bag and placed the water-damaged journal on the corner of his desk, pushing it through a wasteland of empty mugs. "This belonged to Dr. Eshe." The name hung in the air. The reporter stopped rolling the cigarette. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something other than boredom in their depths. He didn't touch the journal. "I remember that name. Tech genius. Had a breakdown, accused Ikezi of stealing her work, then vanished. Corporate espionage, they called it. Old news." "They lied," Adana stated. She pulled the necklace from under her shirt, the silver weaver bird landing softly on the dusty desk. This was hers. "She gave it to my grandmother." Kalo glanced at the necklace, then back at Adana, his expression shifting to one of weary suspicion. "And now you have it. What do you want? Money? You think Ikezi will pay you for this? You're a fool. His sister will have you thrown in a ditch." "I'm not a fool," she snapped, her patience gone. "And I don't want his money. I want you to listen." He picked up the journal, his movements slow. He flicked through the warped pages, his face a mask of cynicism. "A diary and a dream. I don't have time for this." He tossed it back on the desk. Adana felt a surge of desperation. He was her only shot. She seized on the one word she knew was more than just a word. "They called the project Weaver. That means something to you, doesn't it?" Kalo froze. The hand holding the cigarette paused halfway to his lips. His gaze snapped to hers, and for the first time she saw the sharp, predatory intelligence hiding beneath the exhaustion. Project Weaver. It was the rumor he had chased for months back then, the missing piece of the Eshe scandal he could never prove. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Where did you hear that name?" "It's in the journal. And it's in here." She held up the necklace. "There's a code hidden in the threads. It opens a server." Kylo stared at her, then at the pendant, a slow, dawning realization spreading across his face. The boredom was gone, replaced by a raw, hungry ambition. This was it. The white whale. The story that had gotten away. "Show me," he commanded. Adana took out her UV pen light and her phone. The room was already dim, but Kalo stood and pulled the grimy cord for the blinds, plunging them into near darkness. She clicked on the pen light, its purple glow weak. "The batteries are dying," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just do it." She held the light over the necklace. The faint blue pattern flickered into existence. Kalo leaned in so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. He took her phone, his own hand surprisingly steady. He aimed the camera. "It's hard to get a lock," she warned. He grunted, adjusting the angle with the focus of a surgeon. After a few tense seconds, the phone vibrated. The password prompt appeared. Kalo's eyes were wide, gleaming in the phone's light. "Password?" "Weaver," Adana said. He typed it in. The screen refreshed, revealing the file directory. Project Weaver, the Ikezi Betrayal. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Kalo's face. He began to scroll, his thumb moving faster and faster. He clicked on the Fumi folder, his eyes scanning the email subject lines. He let out a low whistle. "Sweet mother of God," he whispered. He looked up at Adana, his face transformed. The jaded, burnt-out hack was gone. In his place was the journalist her grandmother had written about. "This isn't just a story," he said, his voice electric. This is a bombshell. This is dynamite." He stood up and began to pace the small cluttered space. A caged animal suddenly set free. "We can't just leak this. They'll bury it. They'll claim it's a fabrication, a deepfake. They'll destroy your credibility in an hour." "So what do we do?" Adana asked. Kylo stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes blazing. "We don't whisper. We scream. We need a stage. A public, undeniable stage where they can't cut the feed before the damage is done." He strode to his desk, rummaging through a pile of envelopes until he found what he was looking for. He held it up. It was a thick, embossed invitation. "The grand opening of the new Ikezi Foundation Tech Hub," he read, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "Live-streamed globally. Baraka himself will be giving the keynote address." He looked at Adana, then at the necklace, then back at her. The alliance was sealed, not with a handshake, but with a shared, dangerous understanding. He needed her key. She needed his fire. "Get some rest," Kalo said, his voice humming with newfound purpose. "We're going to a party, and we are going to burn them to the ground." The Ikezi Foundation Tech Hub was a cathedral of glass and steel, a testament to Baraka's carefully constructed legacy. Tonight it was filled with the most powerful people in Port Kala. Adana, dressed in a plain but professional dress Kalo had bought for her, felt deeply out of place. She clutched the strap of her bag where the necklace and UV penlight were hidden. Kalo, by her side, was a changed man. He wore a clean-pressed suit. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room, a general sizing up his battlefield. He had registered them both under his press credentials. Adana was his assistant. On stage, Baraka Ikezi was in his element, speaking about corporate integrity and the power of innovation to lift up the disadvantaged. His voice was smooth, his gestures expansive. He looked directly into the cameras broadcasting the event across the globe. "We succeed not by climbing over others," he declared, "but by building ladders for them to climb with us." Adana felt a surge of nausea. In the front row, Fumi watched her brother, her expression one of controlled pride. She looked serene, powerful, untouchable. The speech ended to thunderous applause. Baraka beamed. "We have time for a few questions." Kalo's hand shot up. A host with a microphone pointed to him. The reporter stood, his movements calm and deliberate. "Kalo Mbeki, Independent Press," he said, his voice clear and steady, carrying through the large auditorium. "Chief Ikezi, a wonderful speech on integrity. I'd like to take you back to the beginning. Could you tell us about your first major success? Could you tell us about Project Weaver?" A ripple of confusion went through the audience. On stage, Baraka's smile faltered. The name, spoken so publicly, hit him like a physical blow. He blinked, his hand automatically reaching for his glasses. Beside him, Fumi went rigid. Her serene mask cracked, her eyes narrowing as she locked onto Kalo. She recognized him. The washed-up reporter who had snooped around the Eshe affair years ago. A cold dread, an emotion she hadn't felt in years, coiled in her gut. "Project Weaver?" Baraka stammered, his voice suddenly losing its resonance. "That was a very long time ago. An early internal code name." "My sources say it was a collaboration," Kalo pressed, his voice unyielding, "with a Dr. Eshe, a name the Ikezi Corporation seems to have forgotten. Could you remind us of her contribution?" Panic flashed in Baraka's eyes. He looked helplessly towards his sister. Fumi's gaze was no longer on the journalist. It was sweeping the area around him, searching. And then she saw her. Adana, the girl with the necklace, standing up, beginning to walk towards the stage. Fumi understood instantly. This was not a random question. This was a coordinated attack. She subtly lifted her hand, 2 fingers raised. Across the room, her head of security saw the signal. It meant shut it down. All of it. Adana was halfway to the stage when the microphone in Kalo's hand went dead. Apologies for the technical difficulties. A smooth, disembodied voice announced over the sound system. We seem to have an issue with the audio feed. On stage, Baraka allowed a small, relieved smirk to touch his lips. Fumi was already on her feet, signaling for security to intercept Kalo. The trap had been sprung and it had failed. But Kalo wasn't looking at the dead microphone. He was looking at his phone, which he held up in his hand. A small red light glowed at the top. He was already live streaming. "They've cut the feed," Kalo's voice said. Not to the room, but to the thousands of people watching his independent stream on a network of blogs he'd prepped. "But you can't censor the truth." Adana reached the stage just as 2 guards converged on Kalo. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the weaver bird necklace from her bag, its silver and gold glinting under the stage lights. Kalo's phone was already connected to the small, powerful projector in his other hand. He aimed it at the massive blank screen behind Baraka. Fumi screamed, "Stop him!" But it was too late. A beam of light shot from Kalo's hand, illuminating a huge, magnified image of his phone screen on the main display. The audience gasped. Adana held the necklace steady. Kalo clicked on the UV pen light, its purple beam hitting the delicate golden threads. On the giant screen, the audience saw the glowing, intricate QR code appear. They watched as Kalo's phone camera scanned it. They saw the password prompt. He typed Weaver. The file directory exploded onto the screen, 10 feet high. Project Weaver, the Ikezi Betrayal. A collective intake of breath swept the auditorium. Before security could tackle him, Kalo's thumb jabbed at the screen, opening the Fumi folder. Emails, magnified for all to see, filled the display. Subject lines blazed across the screen. The Eshe problem. Finalizing the frame-up, he opened one. An email from Fumi to Baraka. "The evidence has been planted. Her career is over. We are secure." A roar of outrage erupted from the crowd. People were standing up, shouting. Phones were out everywhere, recording, sharing, amplifying. The scandal was no longer a private stream. It was a firestorm. On stage, Baraka Ikezi seemed to shrink. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty gray mask of horror. He looked at the screen, at the irrefutable proof of his own damnation, then at Adana, who stood there, holding the ghost of his past in her hand. The carefully constructed world of Chief Baraka Ikezi was not just cracking, it was being demolished in real time, block by digital block in front of the entire world. Fumi was being restrained by the Foundation's own board members. The security guard stood frozen, unsure of who to obey. Kalo, a triumphant savage grin on his face, was finally wrestled to the ground, but the damage was done. The truth was out. The story ends not with a celebration, but in the blinding, chaotic aftermath. Adana stands alone on the edge of the stage, the necklace still in her hand. A hurricane of camera flashes engulfs her, the sound of reporters shouting her name, a deafening wall of noise. She has won. She has her justice. But as she looks out at the sea of faces and cameras, she understands with a chilling certainty that her old quiet life, the one she fought so hard to protect, is gone forever. The price of truth had been paid in full.